There will be a significant acidosis if you are consuming a fair amount of animal protein. So I've published a couple of review papers on this topic. And so to kind of level set on how this happens, if you look at your urinary pH and it is 6 or less, which it will be on a high animal protein diet. My urinary pH is always about 5, which is 100 times more acidic than what it should be. A urinary pH of 7 versus 5 is 100 times more acidic. So what we need to understand, though, is that why is the urine more acidic when you are on a high animal protein diet? Actually, it's your kidneys producing more acid because when you consume animal protein, the liver oxidizes it to a sulfuric acid. So 2 hydrogen ions and a -2 sulfate. Those hydrogen ions then systemically circulate throughout the body, and about 80% of those will be neutralized by your own bicarbonate. So your bicarbonate will acutely drop, and you will acutely become more acidic for about 4 hours. This actually acidifies the interstitial fluid around the bone, and that will cause the osteoclast to break down bone. This has been shown in the Bellevue study, which was a year-long carnivore study, taking Stephenson and Anderson, who were Arctic explorers. It put them in significant negative calcium balance for a year. They had calcium balances measured out to 12 months. And it caused, in Anderson, 34,000 milligrams of calcium loss, which 32,000 could have only come from bone, because you only have about 2 grams of calcium that could actually be lost out of the body until you have to start taking calcium from bone, because 99% of our calcium stores are from bone. So they lost so much calcium in that year study. It sort of proved that actually being on a high animal protein diet can actually break down bone. But there's been dozens of other studies showing this too, looking at markers of bone breakdown and markers of bone formation. They go down on a high animal protein diet for bone building, and bone breakdown markers go up. This isn't to say that bone health can't improve on a carnivore diet going from a standard American diet. This is where it gets confusing. It's a slow, insidious loss of calcium out in the urine when you are eating a high animal protein diet. So it could take 10 or 20 years to actually see a decrease in bone mineral density based off of calcium. But if you are someone who is eating low protein, now you're eating a carnivore, you're eating high protein, low protein is worse than the low-grade acidosis of high protein. Let me be clear with that. So it's just that it's better to offset that acid load with like bicarbonate or fruits and vegetables, because you still lose a tremendous amount of calcium out in the urine. And there's been so many human clinical studies showing this. It's just nobody really has looked at this research or published it. So again, what happens is the liver releases the hydrogen ions, 80% are neutralized by your bicarbonate. Your kidneys are going to then reproduce all that bicarbonate to get your body back to that same level, because it fights to always keep bicarbonate at a normal level. But at the same time, it has to produce an equal amount of acid. That comes out in the urine. So the acid that's coming out in the urine isn't actually what was released by the liver. That was neutralized by your own bicarbonate. But then your kidneys produce more bicarbonate to get it back up. And at the same time, they have to produce more acid, more hydrogen ions. That's where that acid is actually coming from. But it is directly reflective of the acid load that was released when you ate that bolus of protein. So you can't look at blood pH, because it's only going to go down slightly. Like, you're going to stay in the normal range. But what people need to understand is the normal range is 2 standard deviations away from normal. Like, most normal people are already acidic. You don't want to be 2 standard deviations away. So if you are on the lower end of normal on a bicarb or a pH, that's not good. You are likely low. You likely have low-grade acidosis. But if you just look at your urinary pH, a urinary pH of 6 or less, you definitely have low-grade acidosis for those 4 hours within when you tested it.
Okay, let's come back to you. You mentioned the fact that you are slightly acidic or significantly. Yes. You mentioned something in the range of 5 or 5 point something. Okay, significantly. And we know you're eating a lot of animal products.
Yes.
So for somebody saying, okay, what you just shared would allude to the fact that you're doing something detrimental to your health. So given all that, what do you do to buffer the fact that you are more acidic?
Yeah, so let's take a step back too. So in nature, there's an electrolyte that naturally occurs in meat and in the fluids, in blood. It's called bicarbonate. Once the animal dies, if you consume fresh meat, you're getting a decent amount of bicarbonate in fresh fluids. After 6 hours, it's almost completely gone because post-mortem, the lactic acid starts building up, right, due to the lack of blood flow. So the hydrogen ions will increase and it'll deplete the bicarbonate. So you're literally consuming a more acidic meat and more acidic fluids if you're consuming meat 6 hours or after upon death. So we used to consume fresh meat and fresh fluids at least some of the time. So nature put bicarbonate in there on purpose. And a lot of people will kind of make fun of people and say, there's no such thing as an alkaline diet and you can't alkalinize the body. Well, we are actually alkaline. First of all, our blood pH is 7.4. And that's so let me also take a step back here. pH of water is 7 at a room temperature of 77, okay? But temperature also affects pH. So in our bodies at a 98.6, a pH 7 water is actually a pH of 6.8. So for our blood to be 7.4 goes to show you we are more alkaline than water would be at that level. So we keep our bodies more alkaline. So if you eat a fresh mammal, is what I'm trying to say, if you eat an elephant, you're eating something that's alkaline. It is more alkaline than acidic. So yes, there is something called, there is a real alkaline diet that is consuming fresh animals. They're alkaline, they're not acidic until 6 hours or after death. Now it is more acidic. So I think that's important to understand. So I take bicarbonate to offset it. Basically, I take, it's about, let me run the numbers here. I do about 1.2, 1.3 grams of sodium/potassium bicarbonate for every 7 ounces of animal foods that I consume. That will essentially neutralize the acid load.
Okay. And in layman's terms, that's just baking soda, correct?
Baking soda is just sodium bicarbonate.
Right.
Yeah, I take a blend of sodium and potassium. Yeah.
And when will you take that? Say you're, firing up the barbecue, you're about to have a steak. Are you doing it beforehand, during, after?
For the first week, I think it's kind of good to take it like maybe 45 minutes beforehand because you do get a little bit more burping until you get used to it. But then afterwards, think about it. It was always in the meat. We would always consume bicarbonate with meat. So I like to take it right actually with my meal because my meal reminds me to take it. And also, your body's really smart. It will instantly increase the production of acid to make sure that everything in the stomach gets fully digested. So a lot of people will be like, I don't want to take bicarbonate with my meal. It's going to prevent me from digesting my food well. That doesn't happen at all. The animal studies they've looked at animal studies and they've shown that when they give the animals bicarbonate and they can directly measure the stomach acid and the gastric juice production, et cetera, there's no change because the body is smart and it just compensates for that. And how exogenous bicarbonate alkalinizes you isn't just that you absorb the bicarbonate. What ends up happening is, remember how I said when you're excreting acid, it's actually from us producing bicarbonate and then also acid. When you take exogenous bicarbonate and you deplete your acid level, your stomach's going to then get that acid level back up. But at the same time, it has to produce an equal amount of bicarbonate. That's how you become alkaline. Taking exogenous bicarbonate is your body is making more as it's producing more acid to offset the little bit of depletion that you gave it. It's called the alkaline tide. So a lot of people try to say that I was wrong by saying, oh, well, when the bicarb hits the acid, you'll just burp it out. They don't understand the alkaline tide. So I've had many people try to counter me. I've yet to see a single person that's actually published on the topic like I have. And I've yet to see a single person ever come at any of the clinical studies that I've shown to disprove what I'm saying is wrong. And the reason why I get a little defensive is because I care so much about my academic career and I publish in this space. And I hate when layman people try to say I'm wrong about acid-base balance because they've never published on it. And so I'm super passionate about that, which is why you can see it why I'm getting a little bit, because I've had some people come at me that are considered really smart in this space And a lot of people have kind of taken their side thinking they're right. But trust me when I say that the clinical evidence in humans definitely proves me correct.
When it comes to what you just shared, this is primarily all new for me in preparing for this interview. And I just want to dig into the nuance here like we are to fully understand it. It's not something I've considered before. I've heard meat is acidic. People, it might be more plant-based people say meat's acidic for the body, but don't give the justification like you just have. So in coming into this conversation, I want to make sure we got into this. And I'm coming in with an open mind. I just want to understand and push back on different areas to make sure you get the story out there and I can fully understand.
Yeah. Part of it is that people will say, well, the blood pH doesn't go very low. But hey, when you're magnesium deficient, you can have a normal blood level. That doesn't mean the body isn't deficient in magnesium. And same thing with acidosis. A lot of the acidosis is occurring in the interstitial fluid, which we're not measuring. It's funny too, this one carnivore came at me and he did it publicly so I can mention who it was. He follows me and we're friendly, but his name's Carnivore JT. And he, did a video saying, look at all my blood levels, et cetera, are fine. His CO2 was 23, which a bicarb is 95% of CO2, which means his bicarb was less than 22, which is clinically low. In other words, he proved to the world that he essentially has low-grade acidosis, but he thought he was about to prove me wrong, but he didn't. He ended up proving me right, which is kind of funny if you ask me. So you can look at your CO2 levels too, multiply it by 95%. That'll tell you what your bicarb is. Typically, it wouldn't be low, though. It shouldn't be low. Like, to go outside of the normal range, you are really acidic. That should not happen. So if you have a CO2 of 23 and a bicarb less than 22, holy cow, you are consuming a ton of animal protein to do that. And, his post clearly showed that, which I thought was kind of funny.
This world is something I've been in for a long time, and I've dug deep, given what I do, week in, week out, day in, day out, into this. And I haven't heard anybody else get into this with near the detail that you're bringing to the conversation. Is there anybody else talking about this? And if not, why not?
It's a great question. So I have a pin tweet that goes over a lot of the studies, and I included Sean Baker, I included Ken Berry, who I kind of consider friends. I've done podcasts with both of them numerous times. So I don't care I don't name myself Carnivore James DiNic, right? Because you do that, now you're locked in, right? Like, these people don't want to change their hashtags or whatever you want to call it, right? Their names now, because they're really all in on this. And so they've been promoting carnivore for so many years, they don't want to see anything negative. I mean, for the longest time, I didn't want to believe it either. So, but I don't form to any type of group, or I don't have any type of skin in the game. I just want to know what's healthy, what's real, what's not. Even Anthony Chaffee, I asked him, hey, do you want to discuss this topic on your podcast? Because we were going back and forth a little bit friendly. And I saw that he saw it. It says seen. My message, never responded back to me. So he doesn't want to Richard Smith, who me and him actually had a battle with, he's actually willing to bring me on to discuss this. So very, very few people are going to be willing to discuss it because it flies in the face of like what they've been promoting, because it brings up a negative side effect of animal protein. And I'm animal based. I don't even want to admit that there's a negative side to overeating animal protein, but just like you can overeat carbs, just like you can overeat fat, you can overeat animal protein.
You've mentioned a bunch of previous guests of the show, including Anthony Chaffee. I'd love to do a friendly debate with him or one of the other people you mentioned if they're interested on the show. So I'll publicly put that out there if you're open to that.
I mean, you can, but if he didn't even respond to me, like in a friendly just discussion, me and him, I doubt he's going to want to debate me. You know what I mean? Because I would have just friendly discussed it on his own podcast. Whether he would actually want to debate with me, I highly doubt it. You can. I just don't like coming off like that. Like, oh, let's debate. Like, who's right, who's wrong? Because then people get defensive and then they don't have an open mind. I came to him and wanted to just come as a guest, because typically when you come as a guest, you're going to have at least somewhat of an open mind. When you're debating someone, your defenses are already up. You're going to never give in. And he's done a few videos before even understanding how meat could cause an acid load, which is, it's understandable. If you haven't published on this topic, you're not going to really understand how the heck can meat bring an acid load. But it's because meat is 2 to 5 times higher in sulfur-containing amino acids called methionine and cysteine. And when our liver oxidizes cysteine, it releases sulfuric acid. And so that's where you get the 2 hydrogen ions, which makes the body more acidic, and also a -2 sulfate when that happens. You form sulfuric acid, and then that dissociates very quickly to the hydrogen ions and the sulfate. So there's that. And there's also a potential downside on if you have healthy kidneys and good renal reserve. When you consume a very high bolus of animal protein, you will hyperfilter because of the spike in amino acids, the spike in urea, and also the acid load, where your GFR can go up by 50%. And that's been shown in a few studies to actually more than double albumin in the urine of young individuals, like 24-year-old men who can really hyperfilter. You give them a large animal protein load, they can start spilling more than twice the albumin in their urine. You won't see that with an older person who can't hyperfilter as well. But there is potential that high animal protein intakes, not offset with bicarbonate, can actually damage the kidneys. We need more data. We only have out to 1 week studies. But I don't like to see studies showing more than doubling of albumin in younger individuals over consuming animal protein.
I believe you touched on this, but I want to go deeper into it. How long of a time frame are we looking at? Because I'm sure you'd agree, there's a lot of people in the carnivore world that are subjectively at least thriving for whatever period of time. So given all you shared there about the science and what goes on with the physiology, how long does that take to play itself out before somebody is going to notice their health tanking?
We don't 100% know. If I were to sit here and say, 10 years, I'd be lying, because we only have a carnivore study out for 12 months. So I can technically only speak to that long of a period of time. But based on the 12 months and the negative calcium balance, somewhere between, I would say, 10 and 20 years, where it would be realistic to see a drop in calcium levels that you could clinically see on a bone mineral density scan as being low. Now, the caveat, though, is when you start eating more animal protein, you start lifting more weights, you can start actually building bone mineral density compared to someone who's eating a low amount of protein on a standard American diet. So you can see bone mineral density improve on a carnivore diet. How long it would take to actually offset those gains based on calcium losses, again, could be 20 or 30 years. And that's only if you're consuming what Anderson and Stephenson consumed, which was just muscle meat, some of the associated fat, and organs. If you're smart enough to consume some dairy, then you're not going to have as much of an issue. So there's been carnivores that have been on carnivore for 60 years, but they also drink raw milk. And apparently there doesn't seem to be any real issues in regards to at least like fragility fractures or anything like that. So you can offset it. It's not like if you're on a carnivore diet, it's 100% going to be bad. If you're eating a muscle meat carnivore diet that does not provide enough calcium, you will go into negative calcium balance for at a minimum of 1 year. And at the 1 year mark, Anderson and Stephenson were still losing about 175 milligrams of calcium out of their body every single day. So I don't see that really tapering off to very minimal amounts until at least another year. But if it hasn't shut off we shut off sodium losses within 1 or 2 weeks. So for the calcium losses to not shut off after a year tells me that it's not something that our bodies actually have the ability to just quickly shut off. That, in my opinion, it would continue to happen if you keep eating a large animal protein load.
So you mentioned early on in this piece that if we were to eat the animal fresh within 6 hours of kill,
yes,
what we're talking about here would be not of concern.
Yeah, not of a concern. You would just get some bicarbonate. So you would get about if you consumed it. So basically, most animals consume an animal even before it's dead. They're eating it alive. Lions will suffocate it first, but then they're eating it right away. You're going to get about 1,000 milligrams of bicarb per kilogram of meat if you consume it right away. That won't fully offset the acid load, but that will significantly reduce it. Because remember, I said I consume about 1.3 grams of sodium/potassium bicarbonate, which isn't all, it's like 80% bicarbonate. So that I consume about a gram for 7 ounces, but you only get a gram per kilogram of meat, which is 2.2 pounds. So it's not fully offsetting, but you're offsetting some of that. Another good example of kind of supports the acidosis theory is there's been studies looking at the Inuit born in the late 1800s and early 1900s and looking at their bone density. Now, you kind of got to look at women, because even men that consume a standard American diet, their bone density never even gets low enough to have a spontaneous fracture. It just doesn't happen in men. In women, at 75 though, it typically does. The Inuit, they were having fractures and osteoporosis a full decade before Caucasians on a standard American diet. So the Inuit had worse bone health in regards to, even looking at the ancient extinct Inuit, had a ton of vertebral compression fractures. So we know through bone studies on basically the Inuit that went extinct, but also bone mineral density scans on Inuit eating a traditional Inuit diet that were born late 1800s, early 1900s, that they have worse osteoporosis and worse bone mineral density. So that also further supports from a population standpoint as well, that yes, this acidosis can actually contribute to osteoporosis in women. It's not as big. So like Sean Baker, Sean Baker, he's a huge guy. He's like 6'5", 250 pounds with pure muscle. His peak bone mineral density and bone mass is way more than your typical average man. So I wouldn't even really expect to see much of an issue for him when a normal standard American person, male, never even reaches a bone mineral density to have a spontaneous fracture. So Sean Baker isn't going to be having that when he's doing box jumps, right, and building his bone density, doing all those other things. So again, there's things you can do to offset the bone mineral density loss, but I still think when you acidify the interstitial fluid, all receptors interface the interstitial fluid. Thyroid receptors, insulin receptors, think of any receptor. Receptors only function within a very narrow range of a pH. So you can potentially mess up the functioning of hormones if you're constantly acidifying the interstitial fluid. And there have been studies proving that if you induce acidosis in someone, it will lead to insulin resistance. So it's just, I think from a perspective of optimal health, taking some bicarbonate with animal protein is going to have a lot of benefits, to be fair.
A couple of other variables you brought in, I want to bring back in: exercise and drinking dairy, or consuming dairy, sorry. Do you think if those were done strategically within a carnivore diet that included dairy, obviously, that somebody could nullify what you're talking about here?
It would nullify the negative calcium balance if they are consuming enough calcium from that product. Hard cheeses are very acidic. So Parmesan cheese will bring the highest acid load into the body, whereas milk and yogurt has a neutral effect, or actually might even be slightly alkaline. So if you're consuming raw milk or you're consuming yogurt, that is actually going to potentially somewhat neutralize some of the acid, but not fully, not even close. But you're also going to get good calcium. But you still aren't inhibiting the acidosis occurring in the interstitial fluid. And so you're breaking down the bone, but at least you have the calcium now to kind of regain it back then, right? So like you're stripping it, but then you're hopefully having enough calcium to kind of rebuild it again. Then you're stripping it again. So maybe you don't actually go down in bone health. But if you're not taking bicarbonate, you're still not going to offset the low-grade acidosis and all the potential harms that could happen from a receptor perspective, from a pain perspective. A lot of people have joint pain because of the interstitial acidosis too. There's been studies giving alkaline minerals, and that reduces back pain and joint pain as well.
You mentioned the fact that when you're buffering this, you take a product that has the baking soda, and I think it was a form of potassium. What is that specifically? Like, is there a brand name that people can get?
Yeah, I think it's made by SFI. It's called bicarb formula, bicarb formula. Um, and it's sodium and potassium bicarbonate. And there's been so many randomized studies giving sodium or potassium bicarbonate or citrate, because citrate turns into bicarbonate in the body, to people with osteoporosis or kidney disease. And it literally improves bone mineral density, improves bone mass, improves kidney health. So you can quickly see benefits in people with kidney dysfunction or poor bone health when you give bicarbonate or citrate. So that's another testament to why I think we should be taking these supplements.
And when it comes to this acidity, does it differ between different kinds of meat? Red meat,
Yeah.
chicken, fish? Talk about the differences there.
Fish is more acidic, will bring a higher acid load. Processed meats will bring an even higher acid load. And egg yolks, because of the sulfur, that's where most of the hydrogen ions are coming from, the sulfuric acid. So anything high in sulfur, which is really your hard cheeses and your eggs, are a big acid load. So you got to also, that's a great question. You're asking really good. I've never ever been interviewed by someone that's asked this many good questions. Hard cheeses and eggs are the most acidic, quote unquote. Then your processed meats, then grains. And then after that, you can bring alkalinity into the body. So you can offset the acid load of animal foods with low oxalate fruits and vegetables, because the oxalates will prevent the basically citrate from being released and turning into bicarbonate in the fruits and vegetables. So it has to be low oxalate fruits and vegetables. But you have to consume 2 to 3 times the amount of those to fully offset the acid load of animal foods. I don't do that because I'm 80-85% animal based. That's why I supplement with sodium and potassium bicarbonate.
Okay. And you mentioned 7 ounces being, you gave a certain ratio there of bicarbonate that you take when you have that much meat. If you're having smaller amounts of meat, do you worry about it? What I'm getting at here is anytime you're consuming something acidic, you got into the egg yolks and the cheese, are you always doing this? Or just if you're having a big bolus of acidic food?
So I'm always doing it because there's never going to be a meal where I'm eating less than 5 ounces total of animal foods. And really, I would say somewhere around 4 ounces or more is probably enough of a load to lead to a fairly significant acid load in the body. So, and of course it will depend, right? If it's 4 ounces of eggs, that's a much higher acid load than 4 ounces of steak. But typically I'm probably having somewhere around 7 to 8 ounces of animal foods per meal, which is definitely enough to need to be offset by sodium and potassium bicarbonate. But the best way to do it is just look at your urinary pH. If it's 6 or less, that's a significant acid load within 4 hours of that measurement.
What about kids? I believe you have children. Is this something you do with them?
No, I don't. Because again, I think I don't know why I don't. I've never thought about doing that. Honestly, if it was up to me, I probably would, but my wife wouldn't probably allow me to spike their yogurt or whatever with bicarbonate, but I could. They really don't eat that much animal protein, right? Like kids, it'll probably take them till 14 years old till they're really eating like a 8-ounce burger, right? Like my son barely finishes 3 ounces of meat right now at a time, but he is smaller, so like 3 ounces is actually more equivalent to 6. But for an optimal health perspective, should I be doing it? Probably. Am I doing it? No. I worry more about women in particular are much more at risk from this, as we discussed. And I think it's more decades of doing this over and over again where it becomes an issue.
So is your wife on board?
She doesn't eat actually a ton of animal protein. She eats a lot different than me. She eats much less in a sitting than me. So I honestly, she doesn't like all this science stuff, so I don't really talk to her about it. If I can get her to take a couple supplements, I'm happy.
And when did you come across this science? And how long have you been buffering your acidic diet?
Yeah, I published a couple of review papers on this in 2021, and probably started researching it 10 years ago. So I've been taking citrate and bicarbonate on and off for probably 6 years or so. I was on citrate for probably a year and a half, and after a while, it actually started kind of hurting my stomach a little bit because citrate crystals are they're more like crystals than powder, and it can kind of irritate the stomach a little bit if you don't take it with a good enough amount of carbohydrates. So bicarbonate, I've never had a problem, so I'm on bicarbonate now. So I've been really good at buffering the last couple of years, but I had started doing it like 6 years ago, and I was scared to share it with my followers because I thought they would just say, "Oh, you're just saying this to push a supplement." So I never did. I haven't even talked about this until maybe 6 to 10 months ago. Years after I've even published on this topic, because I thought that people would just say I'm doing this to promote a supplement. But people need to understand it's literally just an electrolyte that's naturally contained in fresh meat. And once they actually start understanding it, and I've done diagrams of actually how much bicarbonate is contained in a full adult elephant, there's over 200 million milligrams of bicarbonate or bicarbonate forming substances in an adult elephant, in the blood, in the interstitial fluid, in the meat, and then mostly in the bone. There is a lot of basically carbonate, which will turn into bicarbonate in the bone. And there's also a lot of basically acid buffering substances like phosphate in the bone. So when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were kind of gnawing on the bone, and we were also getting bicarbonate forming substances that way too.
Okay, just to be clear on this piece, fresh animals still contain the bicarbonate. It sounds like if you're eating bones, or maybe we could extrapolate that into making bone broth, how does that fit into all this?
If you're eating bone, then you would be getting some carbonate, and you would be offsetting some of that acid load. How much would depend on how much you're consuming. Most people don't consume bone meal though. So, but that is one potential way to somewhat offset it. I don't think realistically someone's going to be consuming enough bone meal to fully offset the acid load from a high animal protein diet. But I think, yes, you're doing it a little bit.
You mentioned earlier that you consume bone meal. Is that for this purpose?
No, more the calcium, because calcium's kind of got a bad rap, but like calcium's like one of the biggest missing nutrients in a carnivore diet. Like if you're consuming a pound and a half of muscle meat, you're only getting 100 milligrams of calcium. I don't care who you are, you're going to be in negative balance. You gotta be consuming at least, from a physiological standpoint, like of what's even physiologically possible to remain positive balance, 150 milligrams of calcium. But realistically, you should be trying to hit at a minimum 400 milligrams of calcium, and ideally more 600. So I try to hit 500 milligrams of calcium per day, and bone meal helps get me there a little bit. But I do take IM8, has some calcium, and I make sure to get 6 ounces of grass-fed yogurt every single day.
So we talked about the bone piece. What about organs when it comes to calcium and this buffering? Do they fit in?
They won't have calcium to help, and obviously from like an acid production, that's not good either. Like, it's not super high in protein, but it's not going to help, right? It's not like it's has bicarbonate in it. I think a lot of people are lacking in copper. I think some liver once a week or a copper supplement. A lot of people hate on copper supplements because they view it somewhat like oxidative reactive, but all the clinical studies I've looked at looking at copper supplementation has shown decreased oxidative stress, improvements in blood pressure, probably because so many people are deficient in it. So I would rather get copper and risk the quote unquote oxidative stress by taking a copper supplement, or ideally consume some liver, like an ounce of liver every 3 days or something like that. It's like, it doesn't have to be much.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
I had started doing it 6 years ago, and I was scared to share it with my followers because I thought they would just say, "Oh, you're just saying this to push a supplement." So I never did. I haven't even talked about this until years after I published on this topic. Being on a high animal protein diet